The desert night was restless. Inside the forward operating base, the air was thick with dust, diesel, and the faint metallic bite of gun oil. The base wasn't much, just a scattering of concrete bunkers, a few sandbagged walls, and a runway barely long enough for supply aircraft to land. Tonight, it had become a refuge for a Navy SEAL team that was bleeding, exhausted, and dangerously close to being overrun. The men had returned from a mission that hadn't gone according to plan. What was supposed to be a clean extraction had turned into a nightmare. They had fought through ambushes, improvised explosives, and relentless enemy pursuit. By the time they staggered back through the gates of the base, they were down to their last magazines, some carrying wounded, others too tired to even speak. Their eyes said everything. This fight wasn't over. The enemy was regrouping, and it was only a matter of time before they came crashing down on the base. Inside a dimly lit command room, the SEAL captain stood hunched over a table, covered in maps and radio equipment. His face was hard, worn with years of combat, but the lines around his eyes revealed more than age. They showed the weight of command, the burden of having men's lives tied to his decisions. Around him, his operators shifted uneasily, checking weapons, exchanging whispers, trying to mask their fatigue. The captain knew what they all knew. They weren't going to hold out long without air support. On the ground, SEALs could fight, maneuver, and improvise. But when the numbers turned against them, when the enemy had vehicles, mortars, and waves of fighters, they needed the sky on their side. He straightened, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "Any combat pilots here?" It wasn't a question he expected to yield much. This was a SEAL forward operating post, not an air wing base. His men were trained for water insertions, demolitions, raids, not flying aircraft, but desperation forced him to ask anyway. The room shifted with restless movement. Operators looked at one another, shaking their heads, some lowering their eyes. Nobody spoke. The silence was answer enough. Then, from the far end of the room, there was the sound of a chair scraping lightly against the concrete floor. Heads turned, and eyes fell on someone few of the SEALs had paid much attention to during their time here. She was young, mid-30s maybe, but carried herself with a stillness that drew notice once the spotlight turned to her. She wasn't dressed like them, not in combat kit weighed down with gear, but in standard fatigues, smudged with dust and streaked with grease from long hours working on base equipment. Her sleeves were rolled, her hair pulled back tight. An Air Force patch clung to her shoulder, faded but unmistakable. Slowly, she rose to her feet. "I can fly," she said. The words were calm, unshaken, yet they hit the room with more force than a gunshot. Several of the SEALs frowned, exchanging doubtful glances. It wasn't hostility. They had seen enough action to know better than to judge too quickly. But skepticism was instinct. In their world, trust wasn't given lightly, and a statement like hers demanded proof. The captain's gaze fixed on her. He said nothing at first, just studied her expression, the way her eyes didn't flicker, the way she stood straight despite the weight of every stare in the room. She didn't waver. "What do you fly?" he finally asked, his voice low, testing. "A-10 Thunderbolt," she replied without hesitation. The reaction was immediate. Some of the SEALs muttered under their breath. Others looked at her with something approaching surprise. The A-10 was no ordinary aircraft. It was slow compared to sleek jets, but every soldier who had ever fought on the ground knew its reputation. Nicknamed the Warthog, it was a flying tank built for one purpose: to protect troops in the fight. Its cannon, a monstrous GAU-8 Avenger, could shred enemy armor and infantry alike. Ground operators swore by it. When the Warthog was overhead, you lived. The captain's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He wasn't one for showing emotion, but the faint narrowing of his eyes suggested that, for the first time in hours, he saw a sliver of possibility. "You're telling me you can get one of those in the air?" "Here?" he pressed. She nodded once. "There's one on the strip, grounded but intact. I can bring it up." The room went quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't disbelief. It was calculation. The SEALs glanced at their captain, waiting for him to weigh the risk. If she was telling the truth, she might be the only chance they had. If she was wrong or unprepared, then sending her up meant losing time and lives they couldn't afford. One of the younger SEALs leaned against the wall, muttering, "She's not even flight-suited. What's she going to do? Duct tape that bird together and hope?" But his voice carried less bite than he intended. Doubt was normal. Hope was dangerous. The captain raised a hand to silence the murmurs. His gaze never left the pilot. "You realize what you're saying," he said, his tone somewhere between a challenge and a warning. "If you're wrong, if you're not what you claim, men die tonight." She didn't flinch. "I know what's at stake," she said. Her voice carried no arrogance, no defensiveness, just certainty. Something shifted in the air then. The men in the room might not have known her, but they recognized that tone. It was the same one their captain used when he gave an order no one dared question. The same tone seasoned operators carried when they volunteered for impossible missions. It was the voice of someone who understood consequences and accepted them. For the first time, a flicker of respect passed between them. The captain exhaled long and slow, then gave a curt nod. "Show me." The room broke into movement at once. Radios crackled, boots scraped against concrete, and men rushed to prepare for whatever came next. The SEALs weren't a unit that dealt in hesitation. Once a decision was made, they moved. Still, the energy was different now. Beneath the skepticism, beneath the fatigue, something else stirred. The possibility of survival. She followed the captain out into the night air, the desert wind pulling at her sleeves. The runway lay ahead, faintly lit under scattered lamps, a dark silhouette of an aircraft hulking at its edge. The A-10 waited like a beast in slumber, its gray paint chipped, its frame battered, but its presence undeniable. For a moment, the pilot slowed her steps, letting her hand brush across the rough metal of a nearby Humvee. It had been years since she'd flown in combat. Years since she'd heard the thunder of the Avenger cannon beneath her. But the memory was etched into her bones. She didn't rise because she wanted recognition. She rose because she couldn't sit still, while men fought without the cover they needed. Behind her, the SEAL captain watched with unreadable eyes. He had seen countless warriors, bold ones, reckless ones, skilled ones. But rarely did someone rise in silence, carry confidence like armor, and make others believe without raising their voice. She hadn't fired a shot. She hadn't touched the controls yet. But already, the course of the night was shifting, and all it had taken was 4 words spoken in a quiet, unwavering tone. "I can fly." The night hummed with unease. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of sporadic gunfire rolled across the desert. The forward operating base was small and vulnerable, a lonely outpost surrounded by hostile ground. Inside, the SEAL captain's words still hung heavy in the air. "Any combat pilots here?" And she had risen. Now every pair of eyes in the dim command room was on her. She wasn't wearing flight gear or a bomber jacket. Nothing to declare her as anything more than another body stationed at the base. A smudge of oil streaked her forearm, and her boots were scuffed from maintenance duty. Yet, despite her ordinary appearance, She stood straighter than the rest, her eyes steady, her voice calm. "I can fly." The silence that followed was sharper than any blade. Some SEALs scoffed under their breath. Others narrowed their eyes, trying to place her. They had seen her around the base but hadn't given her much thought. She kept to herself, busy with equipment, communications checks, and repairs. She wasn't part of their missions. She wasn't someone they trained with, sweated with, or bled alongside. And yet, here she was, claiming she could do the one thing none of them could. The one thing that might keep them alive. The captain's face was unreadable, but his men were less disciplined. One SEAL, broad-shouldered with dirt still streaking his face, leaned forward. "Ma'am," he said, his tone carrying equal parts disbelief and sarcasm. "No offense, but you look like you should be fixing radios, not flying a warthog." The room gave a low chuckle, but it was forced, uneasy. She didn't flinch. Her gaze moved from the skeptical operator back to the captain. "I don't look like anything. I am a combat pilot. You asked if there was one in the room. There is." Her words cut through the laughter like steel. The SEAL who had spoken sat back, lips pressed into a tight line. He hadn't expected her to answer so firmly. The captain's eyes stayed on her, steady, weighing. He wasn't the kind of man to let bravado sway him. He wanted proof. His next question came in a low, even tone. "What do you fly?" Her answer came without hesitation, as though it had been waiting for years. "A-10 Thunderbolt." The effect was immediate. Even the doubters fell quiet. Everyone in the room knew the name. The A-10 wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast, sleek, or beautiful like an F-22 or an F-35, but it was something far more important. It was reliable. It was built for the grunts on the ground, for men like them. It was the aircraft that could fly low, take hits, and keep fighting. Its GAU-8 Avenger cannon was legendary, a weapon so powerful it could reduce a line of armored vehicles to scrap metal in seconds. The SEALs shifted uncomfortably, their skepticism colliding with the possibility that this woman might actually be what she claimed. The captain studied her, his voice dropping lower. "You're telling me you can get that bird up from this strip right now?" She gave a single sharp nod. "Yes, it hasn't flown in weeks, but it's airworthy. I know her systems. I can bring her alive." For a moment, no one moved. The sound of a humming generator outside filled the silence, along with the distant thud of artillery somewhere beyond the walls. The captain finally stepped closer, his boots scraping the concrete floor. He was a man who'd built his life on assessing risk, on measuring men and women in seconds, knowing who could deliver and who would crack. He locked eyes with her. "You know what happens if you're wrong," he said. "If you can't fly, if you're lying, if you fold under pressure, my men die tonight. Do you understand that?" Her face didn't change. "I do." The quiet assurance in her voice unsettled the room. There was no arrogance, no defensiveness, just truth. She wasn't making a promise she couldn't keep. She was stating a fact she had lived. The SEALs shifted again, this time differently. Doubt was still there, but something else crept in, a reluctant respect. They had seen countless men boast, brag, and fail under fire, but rarely did someone stand this calm, this steady in the face of challenge. One of the younger operators whispered to another, "If she's really a hog pilot, hell, we might actually have a chance." The captain's jaw flexed. He turned, pacing a short line, then stopped abruptly and faced her again. "All right," he said. "Prove it." The room came alive at once. Radios sparked, men shifted, orders were barked. A few SEALs grabbed their rifles and moved toward the exit, preparing to escort her to the runway. The weight of the decision hung heavy, but once the captain gave the word, hesitation had no place. She stepped forward, passing through the circle of hardened operators, who still studied her as though trying to reconcile her ordinary appearance with the extraordinary claim she'd made. Some gave small nods as she passed. Others kept their eyes narrowed, but none spoke. As she neared the door, one SEAL muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the men nearby to hear, "Guess we'll see if she's all talk." Another SEAL, older, scarred from years of deployments, shook his head. "Doesn't matter what she looks like. That hog gets airborne. We'll be the ones thanking her." They filed out into the desert night. The base was quiet except for the restless hum of generators and the distant shatter of gunfire. The stars above stretched wide and cold. On the far edge of the runway, faintly illuminated by floodlights, the hulking silhouette of the A-10 sat in silence. Its paint was faded, its edges worn, but its presence was unmistakable. The beast was waiting. As they walked, the captain kept his eyes on her, still studying every movement. She walked with purpose, neither too fast nor too slow, her posture as steady as her voice had been inside the command room. The SEALs followed in silence, their weapons slung but ready, their eyes scanning the desert beyond the perimeter. The enemy could strike at any time, and they all knew the seconds ticking away were precious. But for the first time since they had retreated to the base, there was a flicker of something in the air that hadn't been there before. Hope. And it had started the moment she quietly rose to her feet. The desert wind pressed against the base walls, carrying with it the faint sounds of conflict beyond the perimeter. Every man inside knew the enemy was repositioning, gathering strength for the next strike. Time was not on their side. Yet inside the command room, the tension wasn't just about the enemy outside. It was about the woman who had dared to stand and claimed she could turn the tide. The SEALs had seen their share of specialists before: techs, engineers, medics, pilots who visited bases briefly before vanishing back into safer roles. Some earned respect quickly. Others faded into the background, but none had ever declared themselves in a moment like this. She stood by the door now, ready to walk out toward the dark runway, but the room wasn't finished with her. The weight of the team's doubt pressed down hard. "Captain," one of the senior chiefs finally spoke, his voice gravelly and sharp. "We don't even know her name. For all we know, she's been changing batteries and radios since she got here. You're ready to bet our lives on that?" The captain didn't respond immediately. His eyes stayed locked on her, calm but piercing. He wasn't a man swayed by emotions. He trusted instincts honed through years of combat. Still, he knew his men had a right to their doubts. Trust had to be earned. She didn't wait for the captain to defend her. Instead, she took a step forward, her voice clear. "Captain, I flew 2 tours in Afghanistan, over 60 close air support missions. I've flown in and out of firestorms most people wouldn't walk through. I know what it's like to be on the ground waiting, praying for air cover. I've been the voice that answered those calls." The room quieted. She turned her gaze across the SEALs, her tone sharper now, cutting through their skepticism. "You think I'm just a comm tech? Fine. But right now, none of you can get that hog off the ground. I can. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to believe me. You just have to decide whether you'd rather keep waiting for a rescue that might not come or take the chance standing right in front of you." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Some of the younger operators shifted uncomfortably, their bravado cracking under the weight of her conviction. The senior chief narrowed his eyes, not ready to yield. "Talk's cheap. We've all heard guys brag about what they've done. Some of them don't come back when it's time to prove it." The captain raised a hand, silencing further words. He walked toward her slowly, boots echoing against the floor, stopping just a few feet away. His eyes searched hers, looking for hesitation, for fear, for anything that might betray her claim. But all he saw was certainty. "What's your call sign?" he asked quietly. Her lips pressed into a faint line. "Valkyrie." It wasn't said with flair, just matter of fact, but the name carried weight. Call signs weren't chosen. They were earned, given by squadrons to define a pilot's reputation. The captain had heard hundreds of them over the years. Some were forgettable, but Valkyrie was not a name given lightly. A murmur spread through the room. The SEALs exchanged glances. This was no ordinary pilot. The captain finally nodded once, as if something in him had been confirmed. "That hog's yours, then." The decision seemed final, but not everyone was ready to accept it. "Sir," the senior chief pressed again, lowering his voice but keeping the edge. "You're really going to let her take that plane up? She hasn't even suited up. We've never flown with her. If she screws this up, it's not just her, it's all of us." The captain turned sharply, his voice like a hammer on steel. "Chief, if you've got a better pilot hidden somewhere in your rucksack, speak now. Otherwise, stand down." The chief clenched his jaw, then said nothing. The room settled into a heavy silence. The captain's word was final. But the doubt hadn't disappeared. It clung to the air like static, thick and unshakable. She felt it pressing against her from all sides. The unspoken questions, the mistrust, the quiet calculations of men who had survived countless battles by trusting only their own. She didn't resent it. In fact, she understood it. Trust wasn't given here. It was forged in fire. But she wasn't here to win their approval. She was here to do a job. "Get me to the runway," she said firmly. Two SEALs moved instinctively to flank her, rifles slung but ready. The captain gestured for the rest to prepare. Radios sparked as messages went out, relaying the decision across the base. Mechanics stirred. Floodlights flickered to life along the strip, and shadows danced across the hulking frame of the waiting A-10. Still, the doubt lingered as they walked through the corridors toward the open air. Fragments of whispered conversation followed behind. "She better be who she says she is. If she is, we might just have a shot. Or she gets herself killed before we're out the gate." She heard it all but didn't react. Doubt wasn't new to her. She'd felt it the first time she walked onto a flight line, the only woman in a squadron of hardened combat pilots. She'd felt it the first time she strapped into a hog and had to prove to her crew chief she wasn't going to crack under pressure. Doubt was as much a part of combat as bullets or explosions. But doubt never killed her. Fear never broke her. And tonight, neither would. When they stepped out into the desert night, the sight of the A-10 waiting in silence stirred something deep inside her. The Warthog was battered, scarred from years of service. But to her, it was beautiful. Its wide wings stretched out like a predator at rest, its nose heavy with the unmistakable mouth of the GAU-8 cannon. The sight alone was enough to silence even the loudest skeptic. The SEAL captain stood beside her now, his voice low, meant only for her. "You've got one shot at this. Make it count." She met his gaze, steady as ever. "I don't miss." Behind them, the men who doubted her now stood watching, some with arms crossed, others shifting uneasily. The doubt hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer disbelief. It was anticipation. They wanted to see if she would prove them wrong. The engines of the A-10 loomed silent, waiting, and so did the room full of warriors whose lives now hung in the balance between doubt and trust. The runway stretched out like a scar across the desert night. Faint floodlights lined its cracked edges, casting pale cones of light that barely reached the sand beyond. In the distance, the mountains loomed black and jagged, a reminder of the hostile terrain closing in on them. Somewhere out there, enemy fighters were regrouping, preparing to press their advantage. The SEALs knew they were racing against time, but for this moment, all eyes were fixed on the hulking shadow at the far end of the strip. The A-10 Thunderbolt sat under a thin veil of camouflage netting, its body weathered, its paint chipped by sand and sun. Its engines were quiet, its cockpit dark, as if the beast were sleeping. To most, it looked like little more than an aging relic of another war. But to her, it was something else entirely. It was home. As she walked toward it, the crunch of gravel under her boots sounded louder than the wind. Two SEALs flanked her silently, scanning the desert beyond the perimeter for threats. The captain followed several paces back, his eyes never leaving her. His men had doubts, but his mind was made up. If this woman could breathe life into that war machine, she would be the only thing standing between his team and annihilation. The mechanics on base had done little more than keep the Hog in mothballs. Its maintenance was patchwork, its systems neglected. Most assumed it would never see combat again. But as she approached, she could already see the signs. The bird wasn't dead. It was waiting. She paused at the nose, her hand brushing lightly against the cannon protruding from the front. The GAU-8 Avenger, 7 barrels of steel that could tear through columns of tanks like paper. She remembered the first time she fired it in combat, the vibration shaking her bones, the deafening roar drowning out everything but purpose. Ground troops had cheered then, their lives saved by the storm she unleashed from above. The memory carried her now. One of the younger SEALs posted nearby with a rifle raised a skeptical brow. That thing doesn't look like it's flown in months. She didn't bother to answer. She crouched low, pulling herself up the side ladder with practiced ease, her movements fluid and sure, as though she had done this 1,000 times. In truth, she had. Muscle memory carried her, each motion deliberate and confident. Inside the cockpit, the air was stale, thick with the scent of oil and dust. She settled into the seat, running her hands across the controls. To anyone else, it might have looked like an old, forgotten cockpit, a relic. To her, it was alive. Her fingertips danced across switches, levers, and dials like a pianist reacquainting herself with a long-lost instrument. Below, the SEALs gathered, their shadows cast long across the tarmac. They watched her silhouette, moving inside the canopy. Some crossed their arms, some shook their heads, others leaned forward, curious. The tension was palpable. This was the moment of truth. The captain stepped closer to the nose of the plane, his voice calm but commanding. "How long?" She didn't look down. 5 minutes, maybe less. 5 minutes we don't have, he muttered under his breath. But he didn't stop her. Inside the cockpit, she flipped the battery switch. The panel before her flickered, dim light struggling to come alive. She frowned slightly, then tapped a gauge with her knuckle. The system hummed reluctantly, like a giant awakening from sleep. She moved quickly, testing hydraulics, power, and fuel levels. The A-10 groaned, but responded. "Come on, girl," she whispered softly. "Wake up." One by one, the systems lit. The HUD flickered green. The radios crackled with faint static. She reached for the throttle, setting the first engine to spool. Outside, the SEALs stiffened as the right engine coughed violently, spitting smoke and dust into the air. It whined, faltered, then caught, the turbine spinning into a steady roar. A few SEALs exchanged glances, surprise breaking through their skepticism. The second engine followed, coughing less this time, its roar blending with the first. The night air trembled with power. Inside the cockpit, she checked her displays, her eyes moving with speed and precision. Everything was functional enough. Not perfect, but in combat, nothing ever was. On the ground, the captain folded his arms, his face unreadable, but his eyes betrayed the faintest shift. He was watching a professional at work, someone who didn't need to prove herself with words. She was proving herself with action. The canopy lowered with a hiss, sealing her inside. The base lights reflected faintly off the glass, her face barely visible but steady as stone. She slid the headset on, flicking to the frequency the SEALs used. "Control, this is Valkyrie. Systems green, engines hot, preparing for taxi." The SEAL nearest the captain nearly dropped his radio, staring up at the bird. He muttered, almost to himself, "She wasn't lying." The captain allowed the ghost of a smirk to touch his lips. "No, she wasn't." The Warthog rumbled forward, its wheels grinding against the cracked runway. The sound reverberated across the base, drawing soldiers and staff from the shadows to watch. They gathered at the edges of the strip, their disbelief slowly shifting into awe. For years, this aircraft had sat forgotten, a relic left to gather dust in the desert. Now, under the hands of one determined pilot, it was alive again. Inside the cockpit, her breathing steadied, her hands firm on the controls. She felt the vibration beneath her, the raw, familiar rhythm of the Hog. It was more than a machine. It was a part of her, an extension of everything she had trained for, everything she had survived. She thought of the men waiting on the ground, the SEALs whose eyes had bored into her with doubt only minutes earlier. She thought of the captain, his silent challenge, his demand for proof. And she thought of the enemy waiting just beyond the mountains, confident they had trapped America's most elite warriors. Not tonight. Her voice came cool and steady over the comms, cutting through the roar. "Valkyrie to ground. Let's go hunting." The SEALs on the tarmac stood frozen for a moment, the reality sinking in. The captain finally spoke, his voice low but carrying across the group. "Mount up. She's in the fight." As the A-10 taxied down the strip, dust and heat rising in its wake, the doubt that had filled the room hours earlier began to fade. In its place grew something stronger, something the SEALs hadn't allowed themselves to feel since the mission had gone wrong. Faith. The Hog was alive, and so was their chance. The night air quaked with the low, guttural growl of engines as the A-10 Thunderbolt taxied toward the edge of the runway. Dust and heat plumed around its tires, the desert's dry breath mixing with the exhaust. To the SEALs standing watch on the tarmac, the sight was surreal. This ancient machine, brought back to life by a pilot no one had expected, now thundered forward with purpose. Inside the cockpit, she tightened her grip on the throttle. Her gloved fingers moved with a rhythm ingrained by years of training. The Hog was old, stubborn, but obedient in her hands. Every dial, every flickering display, spoke to her like an old friend rediscovered. Her voice came cool over the comms. "Valkyrie to ground. Rolling in 5. The SEAL captain raised his radio, answering with the steadiness of a man who had seen countless battles, but understood the gravity of this one. "Valkyrie, this is Hammer 1. Godspeed." The nose of the Hog pointed toward the dark horizon. Ahead, the runway stretched like a narrow bridge into uncertainty. Beyond those mountains, the enemy massed hundreds of fighters who thought they had the SEALs cornered. She eased the throttle forward. The engines roared, spitting streams of fire into the night. The beast trembled, then surged ahead, tires screeching against cracked asphalt. Her body pressed back into the seat as acceleration clawed at her chest. At 100 knots, the nose began to lift. At 130, the tires screamed their farewell and left the ground. The hog, heavy and broad-winged, climbed into the desert night with a defiance that seemed almost alive. The seals on the ground tilted their heads skyward. Some cheered under their breath. Others clenched fists in relief. For the first time in hours, hope wasn't a fragile thing. It had shape, wings, and teeth. On the other side of the mountains, meanwhile, the SEAL team pinned in the valley fought tooth and nail. Their position had eroded hour by hour. Ammunition was running dangerously low. Enemy mortar rounds pounded the ridges, dirt and fire erupting around them with bone-rattling force. Lieutenant Cross, the ground team's second in command, crawled behind a battered rock wall, radio pressed to his ear. Static hiss mixed with fragments of comms he could barely piece together. He shouted over the gunfire. "Hammer Base! This is Hammer 2. We are at breaking point. If air doesn't come through in minutes, we're done out here." The answer came through, steady and cool. A woman's voice. "Copy that, Hammer 2. Valkyrie inbound. ETA 3 minutes. Cross blinked, his dirt-streaked face etched with disbelief. He hadn't expected anyone to make it airborne, let alone this fast. He looked at his men, exhausted, bloodied, but still firing. A spark of something long absent flared in his chest. "She's coming," he muttered. "Hold the line. She's coming." In the skies, the hog leveled off at a low altitude, hugging the terrain. Her eyes flicked between the terrain display and the mountains looming ahead. She knew every bump and shift of the machine, trusted it like she trusted her own heartbeat. Her HUD lit with green symbology, targets painted on her screen, multiple heat signatures clustered around the valley. She could almost feel the desperation radiating from the embattled SEALs below. She flipped the weapon systems live, the switches clicking into readiness, the beast arming itself for war. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon hummed with an almost ominous vibration beneath her feet. Her voice cut through the comms, clear and resolute. "Valkyrie on station. Hammer 2, mark your position with smoke." Below, a SEAL popped a red smoke grenade, its plume trailing upward through the darkness like a flare of blood. She spotted it instantly, her eyes narrowing. "Visual confirmed. Stand by for fire." The first run, the hog dipped low, hugging the ridgeline, then banked sharply into the valley. The ground lit with tracer fire, streams of glowing red arcing toward her like furious spears. She felt the rattle of impacts peppering her armor, but the hog was built for this. It could take punishment like no other aircraft. She aligned her crosshairs on a cluster of vehicles surrounding the SEAL's perimeter. With steady hands, she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared, a stream of depleted uranium rounds tearing through the night, molten sparks shredding into the enemy's armor and tearing the valley floor apart. Explosions blossomed in fiery eruptions, silhouettes flung into the air. On the ground, SEALs ducked as the sky itself seemed to open fire. Their enemies, once bold, scattered in panic under the relentless storm. Cross shouted into his radio, voice hoarse but triumphant. "Direct hit, Valkyrie. That's beautiful work." But the enemy was not broken yet. From concealed ridges, they fired back with anti-air weapons, streaks of missiles cutting through the dark. Alarms screamed in her cockpit as the hog's countermeasure system lit up. She yanked the stick hard, banking left, the bulky aircraft rolling with surprising agility. Flares spat from her wings, burning bright against the sky. A missile locked, then veered off, fooled by the heat signature. Another screamed past her right wing, missing by inches. Her jaw clenched, sweat beading on her brow. This wasn't going to be easy. Tail still up, she radioed calmly, though her pulse raced. Lining up for another run. From the valley floor, the seals watched as the hog circled back, its massive silhouette black against the moonlight. One of the younger operators, bleeding from a cut across his temple, whispered in awe, "Holy hell, she's not letting up." Cross reloaded his rifle, his grin feral despite exhaustion. "She's buying us time. Don't waste it. Pour it on them." Rifles cracked, grenades thumped, and the seals surged with renewed energy, pushing the enemy back inch by inch. The tide was turning, but only if Valkyrie stayed in the fight. Her second run. She came in lower this time, skimming the treetops. Her targeting reticle locked on a mortar team setting up on a ridge. She fired, the cannon ripping the position apart in a chain of detonations. Smoke and fire rose in columns, painting the valley in hellish light. The enemy fighters broke in confusion, some retreating, others desperately firing into the sky. The hog thundered overhead, its engine screaming like a predator in the night. Inside, she kept her voice steady. "Hammer 2, corridor opening north. Push your men that direction. I'll clear you a path." Cross didn't hesitate. "You heard the lady. Move, move, move." The seals began shifting, leapfrogging from cover to cover, advancing through the narrow gap she carved with firepower. Every run she made pushed the enemy further back. Every round she fired widened the gap between defeat and survival. The valley, once a tomb waiting to close on the seals, was now a battlefield rewritten by her will. Her body ached from the strain. Her ears rang from the roar of the cannon, but her focus never wavered. The hog was more than a plane tonight. It was a shield, a sword, a declaration that the seals would not die in this valley. As she pulled up from her third run, the captain's voice broke over the comms from base, calm but carrying weight. "Valkyrie, you just changed the game." She exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the burning valley below. The mission was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, the seals had a fighting chance. And she wasn't done yet. The valley burned like a furnace, plumes of smoke curling into the night sky, red embers swirling in the desert wind. The cacophony of gunfire, mortar blasts, and the roar of jet engines collided into a single overwhelming storm. At its center was the A-10 Thunderbolt, circling low, the predator that had turned chaos into opportunity. For the seals pinned below, it was like watching the hand of God carve the battlefield. Every run of the Warthog sent enemy formations scattering like ants under boiling water. Every burst from its monstrous cannon made the ground quake with violence. Lieutenant Cross, dirt streaking his face, shouted over the radio, his voice raw but charged with exhilaration. "Valkyrie, you're tearing them apart. Keep it coming." From her cockpit, she didn't waste words. Her eyes stayed glued to the HUD, reticles locking on clusters of targets. Her hands were steady, her breathing measured. She didn't hear the cheers, the awe, or the disbelief below. All she heard was the hog, the beast purring with deadly potential under her command. "Copy. Hammer 2, she replied evenly. "Next run, inbound." She banked sharply, the G-forces pulling against her body. The world tilted, the valley spinning beneath her. In the faint moonlight, she saw them, the enemy, regrouping, desperate to push back against the American operators who now had air cover. Trucks with mounted guns scrambled into firing positions. A technical truck loaded with rockets pointed skyward. Fighters swarmed like hornets, their muzzle flashes of furious protest. She lined them up. Her fingers squeezed the trigger. The Hog's cannon ripped through the night again, a torrent of shells raining down with merciless precision. The truck exploded in a thunderball of flame, rockets detonating prematurely, chaining across the ridgeline in a cascade of destruction. Enemy fighters were cut down mid-sprint, torn apart by the fury unleashed from above. The ground quaked, the air reverberated, and in that instant, the balance of power shifted completely. On the ground, the SEALs moved with new vigor, no longer just surviving, but advancing. Every time the Hog strafed overhead, they surged forward through the smoke and wreckage, reclaiming ground inch by inch. "Push north. Use the corridor she's carving," Cross bellowed, firing bursts from his rifle. Operators leapt from cover to cover, laying suppressive fire, tossing grenades into bunkers still occupied. The airstrike had broken the enemy's rhythm. Now the SEALs were dictating the fight. One young SEAL, his helmet smeared with ash, stopped just long enough to watch the Hog scream past overhead. His voice was odd, almost reverent. "That sound. It's like death itself." Cross grabbed his shoulder, dragging him forward. "Don't stop moving. She's giving us a gift. Don't waste it." From the cockpit, she could see the battle unfolding below like a living map. The SEALs were pressing out of the choke point, their formation spreading, their movements sharper. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were winning. But victory demanded more. She spotted a heavy emplacement dug into the side of a ridge, a fortified nest with a belt-fed gun sweeping arcs of fire. It pinned several SEALs behind a cluster of rocks. If they stayed, they'd be slaughtered. If they moved, they'd be cut down. Her jaw set. She banked hard, lining up. "Hang tight, Hammer 2, she said into the comms. "I've got that nest." She swooped low, almost skimming the ridge, her cannon roaring again. The fortified position evaporated under the assault. Sandbags torn open, steel twisted, bodies flung. The SEALs wasted no time, surging forward into the gap. "Target destroyed," she called, her voice calm, though her pulse raced. Cross's reply came through, ragged but triumphant. "You're rewriting this battlefield, Valkyrie. Keep that fire raining." But the enemy was far from finished. Smoke trails lanced upward. 2 surface-to-air missiles fired from hidden positions. The cockpit screamed with alarms, red lights flashing across her displays. She reacted instantly. Flares shot out in a burst of heat and fire, streaking across the night sky. She dove hard, engines roaring. Her body slammed against the seat as the Hog screamed earthward. One missile veered off, exploding harmlessly in the distance. The other stayed locked. "Come on," she muttered, yanking the stick, rolling the heavy bird in a desperate, evasive maneuver. She fired another burst of flares, banking violently. The missile chased, closed, then streaked past her wingtip, fooled at the last second. It detonated behind her in a thunderous bloom. The Hog shook violently, but held. The old bird wasn't just flying, it was enduring. Her breathing steadied. "Still up," she reported curtly, engaging remaining targets. The SEALs watched the near miss from below, their hearts seizing for an instant as they thought she might be gone. When the Hog steadied, circling back with engines howling, a wave of renewed adrenaline surged through them. "She's unkillable," one muttered in awe. Cross allowed himself a grim smile. "No, she's just that good." They moved again, firing with fresh fury, every man feeding off the storm above. The enemy fighters, once confident in their superior numbers, now broke ranks. Fear showed in their movements. They weren't hunting anymore. They were being hunted. She banked for another run, eyes narrowing on the last concentration of vehicles at the northern end of the valley. Armored trucks, supply caches, and fighters regrouping for a desperate stand. This was the keystone of their force. Destroy it, and the SEALs would have a clear path out. Her targeting system locked. Her finger hovered over the trigger. She exhaled slowly, her world narrowing to a single point of focus. The GAU-8 roared, its thunder echoing across the valley like the wrath of a storm. Shells tore through the vehicles, detonating fuel tanks in a chain reaction. Fireballs erupted one after another, the blast wave rippling across the battlefield. Fighters fled in every direction, their formation shattered. Below, the SEALs surged. Cross shouted into his radio, his voice fierce with triumph. "Valkyrie just opened the door. Move now." The operator sprinted through the corridor of wreckage she had carved, weapons blazing, precision cutting down stragglers. Smoke and fire cloaked their movements, giving them the cover they desperately needed. What had been a desperate last stand minutes earlier was now a breakout. The hog overhead kept circling, punishing any enemy foolish enough to regroup. The men moved with renewed purpose, their exhaustion pushed aside by the momentum of victory. Every man knew that without the fire from above, this valley would have been their grave. Inside the cockpit, though, she felt none of the celebration. Her world remained the HUD, the horizon, the constant buzz of alarms and weapon systems. Sweat dripped down her temple, her body aching from the strain of constant G-force maneuvers. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. Not until every one of them was out. Her voice, calm as ever, cut through the comms. "Hammer 2, corridor secure. Push north. I'll cover you until the last man is clear." Cross's reply was fierce, gratitude buried beneath urgency. "Copy that, Valkyrie. We're moving." The valley transformed. What had begun as a death trap for America's most elite warriors was now a burning monument to survival. Wrecked vehicles smoldered, ammunition cooked off in scattered bursts, and enemy fighters lay broken across the sand. The valley was no longer the enemy's stronghold. It was their graveyard. The hog circled above, engines howling, guns ready. To the SEALs, its shadow was salvation itself. To the enemy, it was doom incarnate. And at its controls sat the quiet pilot who had risen to her feet when asked a question no one thought she could answer. The fire from above had not just saved lives. It had rewritten destiny. The valley was no longer quiet. It pulsed with fire and chaos, echoing with the dying roar of battle. The A-10's relentless strikes had shattered the enemy's confidence, but the fight was not over. Not yet. Victory here meant survival, and survival depended on one thing: getting the SEALs out alive. High above the smoke and wreckage, the hog circled like a predator, refusing to release its prey. Inside, her eyes scanned the battlefield, her HUD glowing green against the dark cockpit. She could see the SEALs' positions marked by red smoke, their movement coordinated but desperate. She could also see what lay ahead, the enemy's last choke point, dug in across the northern corridor. Trenches, barricades, and heavy weapons blocked the only viable route out. Dozens of fighters still held that ground, their fire disciplined, their numbers greater than the weary team below could overcome without support. She pressed the radio, her voice clipped but calm. "Hammer 2, Valkyrie. You've got hard resistance ahead. I'll clear the corridor. Move only when I give the word." On the ground, Cross crouched behind a smoldering vehicle, rifle pressed to his shoulder. His men were bloodied, exhausted, and running low on ammunition. Yet when her voice cut through the static, something steadied in him. He keyed his mic. "Copy that, Valkyrie. We'll hold until you call it." He looked to his men, faces streaked with soot and sweat, eyes burning with exhaustion. "She's carving us a way out. Keep your heads low. When she clears it, we run like hell." The first strike. The Hog dropped low, wings wide, engines screaming. She aligned her reticle on the first barricade, an emplacement bristling with machine guns. Her finger curled on the trigger. The cannon spat fire and steel, tearing the barricade apart. Gunmen were thrown from their positions, the very earth ripped open by the torrent. Secondary explosions rocked the trench line as ammunition ignited. She pulled up, banking hard to avoid incoming fire. Her displays flashed warnings, small arms peppering the armor, RPG trails arcing upward, but the Hog endured. "First nest down," she radioed, her voice steady. "2 more to go." Cross ducked as debris rained around him, watching the barricade vanish in fire. For a moment, he almost forgot his own exhaustion. He keyed the mic. "Copy. That's one hell of a hole you punched." Beside him, a young operator with shaking hands fumbled another magazine into his rifle. "Sir, do you really think we're getting out?" Cross clapped his shoulder, forcing steel into his tone. "Look up, son. She's still flying. As long as she's up there, we're going home." The men nodded, their faith clinging to the silhouette circling above like a guardian angel. The second barricade. She banked again, eyes narrowing at the second stronghold, a reinforced bunker carved into the ridge itself. RPG fire lanced upward, smoke trails cutting through the night. She fired flares, diving low, her body slammed by G-forces. The Hog rattled violently, alarms screaming, but she held steady, lining up the shot. The cannon thundered again, a storm of rounds hammering the bunker. Concrete crumbled, gunfire sputtered out, a final explosion ripping the structure open, flames consuming the ridge. She climbed hard, her teeth gritted, heart hammering. The Hog shuddered, but stayed aloft. "Second position neutralized," she called, her voice sharper now, betraying the strain. "Corridor opening, stand by." But the enemy wasn't done. From the far end of the corridor, a technical truck rolled forward, its heavy machine guns spitting fire. Behind it, fighters regrouped, pouring into the gap with renewed fury. They knew what she was doing, carving a path for the SEALs, and they would die before letting it happen. On the ground, Cross saw the movement. His blood ran cold. "They're plugging the corridor again. Valkyrie, we need that truck gone now." She was already diving. The Hog screamed earthward, her reticle locking on the truck. She fired. The cannon shredded it in half, the explosion hurling bodies in all directions. She strafed through the fighters behind it, her rounds cutting swaths in the sand. When the dust cleared, nothing stood. The path lay open. Her voice crackled through the comms, hoarse but commanding. "Corridor clear. Move now." Cross didn't hesitate. He turned to his men, his roar carrying through the chaos. "Go. Move north now. She's given us our shot. Take it." The SEALs surged forward, sprinting through smoke and fire. They leapt over wreckage, fired bursts at stragglers, dragged wounded comrades by their vests. Every step forward was survival, every breath stolen from the jaws of defeat. Above them, the Hog circled relentlessly, strafing any force daring to regroup. The roar of its engines became a war cry, a heavy past, a shield. One SEAL stumbled, hit in the leg. Another dropped beside him, hauling him up. "Not leaving you, brother. Keep moving." Together, they limped through the burning valley. Guided by the thunder overhead, Cross ran with them, chest heaving, rifle spitting rounds. He keyed the mic mid-sprint. "Valkyrie, we're in the corridor. Don't let them cut us off." From the far end, The last remnants of the enemy force gathered in desperation. Mortar tubes were dragged into place, RPGs hoisted onto shoulders. It was their final gamble to close the trap before the SEALs could break free. She saw it instantly, her HUD lit with hostile signatures clustering at the exit. If they fired into the corridor now, the SEALs would be slaughtered. Her voice hardened. "Hammer 2, hold your line. Engaging final cluster." She banked steeply, dove into the mouth of the corridor, and unleashed hell. The cannon roared one final time, streams of fire lacerating the ground. Mortar crews vanished in bursts of dirt and flame. RPG teams disintegrated mid-movement. The enemy broke apart in terror, those who survived fleeing into the mountains. She pulled up, engines screaming, the Hog's silhouette blotting out the stars for an instant. When she leveled, nothing remained at the corridor's end but fire and silence. The operators burst through the smoke into open desert, stumbling but alive. The night wind hit their faces, cool compared to the furnace they'd left behind. For the first time in hours, there was space to breathe. Cross slowed, rallying his men as they regrouped beyond the kill zone. He keyed his mic, his voice ragged with gratitude. "Valkyrie, corridor secure. We are clear." There was a pause. Then her reply came, steady, despite exhaustion. "Copy that, Hammer 2. I'll watch your 6 until exfil. Keep moving." The men collapsed briefly into the sand, sucking air, some laughing, some crying. They were battered, bleeding, and worn to the bone, but alive. As they pushed deeper into the desert toward their extraction point, the Hog remained above them, circling endlessly. Its engines growled like a guardian, refusing to leave its charge. The SEALs marched under its shadow, each man knowing they would never forget this night, this pilot, or the fire from above that had carved their salvation. And though she sat alone in the cockpit, drenched in sweat, her body aching, her eyes never wavered from the horizon, she would not rest until every last one of them was out. The corridor had been opened. Now it was their road to freedom. The desert night had begun to ease into pre-dawn. The sky was a deep indigo, faint stars fading as the first hints of light crept over the horizon. The SEALs moved steadily, though slowly, toward the extraction point. The valley, now a smoldering graveyard of enemy forces, lay behind them, silent except for the occasional crackle of remaining fires. Above, the A-10 thundered with a presence both protective and relentless. The Hog had guided them through death and back, and now it circled the perimeter, a vigilant guardian, ensuring the enemy had no chance of a final ambush. Lieutenant Cross, leading the operators, stole a glance upward. The massive shadow against the early morning sky was more than a machine. It was salvation made tangible, roaring wings and steel jaws that had clawed them back from certain defeat. He keyed his radio, voice heavy but filled with reverence. "Valkyrie, status." Her voice cut through, calm and unwavering, despite hours of combat. "Engine stable, cover complete, heading to exfil point in 5 minutes." Cross allowed himself a slow exhale. Their path to extraction was clear. Every man's eyes reflected exhaustion, but underneath it all, the fierce glow of gratitude. None of them had expected to survive the night. She guided the Hog low, skimming the desert floor, as though the plane itself understood the fragility of the moment. The wind tore against her canopy, whistling through the fuselage, carrying the scent of burned earth and spent ammunition. Her hands were steady, each control input precise. Her mind was focused entirely on the exfil. From the ground, the SEALs watched, some leaning on one another, others kneeling briefly to catch their breath, all of them aware of the life-or-death precision of her flight. A miscalculation, A single hesitation, and the extraction point would be compromised. The extraction chopper's faint glow appeared on the horizon, circling into position. Valkyrie keyed her mic again. "Hammer 2, you're clear for extraction. I'll maintain overwatch until you're on board." Cross's reply was simple, curt, and heavy with emotion. "Copy. God bless you, Valkyrie." Even as the SEALs reached the landing zone, pockets of enemy resistance lingered in the surrounding ridges, small teams trying to mount one last interference. Valkyrie dove low, strafing potential threats with surgical precision. Tracer rounds zipped past her canopy, but the Hawk absorbed them, its armored frame deflecting what would have shredded a lesser aircraft. On the ground, Cross and his team sprinted the final 100 meters to the chopper. Some men carried wounded comrades. Others had faces streaked with soot and blood. They didn't look like the elite warriors they were. They looked human, exhausted, grateful, and they owed their lives to the woman in the Hog. She executed another run, taking out a last squad of fighters trying to flank the extraction zone. The cannon spat fire once more, and the enemy disappeared, broken and disorganized. Only then did she signal the SEALs to proceed. Boarding the chopper one by one, the SEALs climbed aboard the waiting helicopter, the rotors kicking up sand and dust that stung eyes and lips. Cross climbed last, scanning the valley behind them one final time before settling inside. "Valkyrie, we're aboard," he called. Her voice came steady, measured, yet tinged with the faintest relief. "Copy that. Hog stable. Standing by for final lift." The extraction pilot acknowledged the Hog's overwatch, and as the helicopter lifted, Valkyrie made one final pass over the valley, sweeping the area clear of any potential threats. Her eyes swept the wreckage, the scorched earth, the bodies of the enemy scattered and broken. Victory had come at a price, but at least the SEALs were alive. The Hog banked, engines screaming in a triumphant, almost mournful roar before turning toward the desert runway. Back at the forward operating base, the Hog's wheels kissed the runway with controlled precision. Dust and sand spiraled around the tires, and she brought the aircraft to a smooth stop. She cut the engines, and the deep rumble faded into silence. The SEALs, now safe, emerged from the helicopter, still alert, but finally allowing their bodies to relax. Cross stepped forward first, his boots crunching against the gravel. He didn't speak at first. He merely watched her climb down from the cockpit, her flight suit smeared with soot, her gloves worn, her face streaked with sweat, but her eyes still unyielding. The base fell quiet. Not a single word was spoken at first. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that acknowledged her bravery without needing applause. Finally, the SEAL captain, the one who had first asked if a combat pilot was present, walked forward. His boots echoed against the concrete. Every man present turned to watch. He stopped before her. There was no need for ceremony, no need for words of praise. He simply nodded. Then, in a gesture that left the room still and reverent, he saluted. She returned it, brief, crisp, and equal in respect. The room exhaled collectively. Cross approached, still breathing heavily, and finally found his voice. "Ma'am, I don't think any of us can ever thank you enough." She shook her head slightly, tired but unwavering. "Don't thank me. Just keep your heads down and stay sharp. That's what matters." Another operator, younger, spoke up, eyes wide. You just saved all of us. Every last one. I don't know how to—" She cut him off gently, her voice calm, by standing up when asked. "That's all it took. That's all any of us can do. The rest is just doing your job." There was a pause. Then the captain, who had been watching silently, spoke again, his voice low and deliberate. "Tonight, We learned something. Appearances don't matter. Doubt doesn't matter. What matters is action. And you, Valkyrie, proved it beyond any shadow of doubt. She nodded, letting the weight of that acknowledgement settle. It was rare in war to earn respect quietly, without words, without fanfare. And tonight, she had earned it in spades. The sun rose fully over the desert. Smoke from the valley drifted eastward, carrying with it the stench of spent weapons and fire. But within the base, the mood was one of quiet reflection. Men who had stared death in the face hours earlier were alive, breathing, moving, and whole. Valkyrie walked toward the hangar, helmet tucked under her arm, boots heavy against the gravel. The SEALs lingered a moment, watching her go, then returned to their duties, changed forever by the presence of the pilot, who had answered a call no one thought could be answered. The captain remained where he was, still watching the Hog's shadow stretch across the runway. Finally, he exhaled and muttered to himself, almost inaudibly, "She's one of us now." And in that simple statement lay more respect than any medal, more honor than any ceremony. The room, the base, and the men within it understood. Sometimes heroism doesn't roar in applause. Sometimes it rises quietly, answers a question, and saves lives in silence. Tonight, Valkyrie had done exactly that. In the heart of a desperate night, the story of Valkyrie, the unassuming pilot who rose to answer a call no one expected, teaches us a profound lesson about courage and action in the face of doubt. Life often places us in moments where we feel unseen, underestimated, or burdened by the skepticism of others. Yet, Valkyrie's story reminds us that true strength lies not in appearances or loud declarations, but in the quiet resolve to act when it matters most. Her unwavering confidence and skill transformed a hopeless situation into a triumph, proving that heroism is defined by deeds, not by the expectations of others. This resonates deeply in our own lives. When we face challenges, it's our ability to stand up, push through fear, and deliver under pressure that shapes our legacy. Valkyrie didn't seek applause. She sought to save lives, showing us that purpose-driven action, rooted in conviction, can move mountains. In a world quick to judge based on surface impressions, her story urges us to trust in our own capabilities, to rise above doubt, and to seize the moment to make a difference, no matter how unlikely the odds. What lessons have you drawn from moments of courage in your own life? How have you overcome doubt to achieve something meaningful? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories. If this tale of resilience inspired you, hit that subscribe button and join our community for more stories that ignite the spirit and remind us of the power within us all.